Today, our presentation will be on harnessing the potential of content in China. All right, so we are Redfern Digital. We're a leading independent brand management agency that develops, manages, and distributes brands across the China mainland and Southeast Asia. So here is our work so far today and some of the brands that we've worked with in the past. And once again, our presenter today will be Ryan Malloy. He's our CEO here at Redfern Digital, and he's been doing all of these webinars in the past, so you are well in good hands. And throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them, and we will get to them in the end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mr. Malloy. Let me make you host, and then you can get started with it. All right. Is everything good on your end, Ryan?
All right, that's great. Thank you, Sandra. One moment, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Can you see that okay, Sandra?
Yes, that looks good.
Brilliant. So welcome everyone today to Harnessing the Potential of Content in China. For those that have been following our webinar series, this is now, I believe, the fourth or fifth one. Today we'll be looking at cross-platform, how can brands better create content. I think this is a really important topic. We often talk about how different platforms are working better than others. But now, as we've seen this change into video and photo format content, it's really, really crucial that brands ensure that they are creating the right content for these platforms. And so what we're looking at is the importance of content in China. We'll dive into short video and its rise, how to be more efficient in utilizing content, differences across different platforms, different types of varieties of content, and then how do you measure the success of your content? And I'll finish with a few different examples. So one of the things is, sorry, one second. So in terms of from a brand perspective, is the steps to building a brand in China, and what do they look like? So the first one is, number one, showcase through the brand accounts content that conveys the brand story, identity, brand key visuals, and brand messaging USPs. So the first step is really about how do you create an account? How are you going to show yourself visually? The second step is then really how does the brand encourage users to generate content and it create that word of mouth, review, recommendations, and unboxing. The third is then working with KOLs and larger celebrities. And the fourth one is then how do you build that out across a number of different things, such as bundles, gift packs, merchandise, to keep it interesting and novel for consumers. So the importance of content in China, as we've seen, content helps to drive around 27.2% of total retail sales of consumer goods through e-commerce in 2022. It is important. We've seen the rise of social commerce and what Douyin's been able to do, and this is really a result of very much content-driven sales. And so what we have seen in the last 3 years is a change away from volume, mass amounts of content, to content that is of a higher quality. So we've seen, for example, photo, video production, much higher quality production levels than we'd seen before. And so when you're trying to create this content, what is important? One is the types of content that perform well. Two is what platforms are you going to focus on? Different platforms have different needs. Three is the content emotionally relevant. This is a very important one. We have seen a change in consumer in consumption in China, especially when we look at Gen Z and millennials. What we've noticed is that consumers are moving away from I buy a product because it's good for me, or because it's made of great ingredients, or because it comes from this country, and they're now focusing on I buy a product because it emotionally relates to me, because it's something that I stand for, it's something that I match with, and it emulates essentially the lifestyle that I want to have. And four, what mechanisms can brands build to ensure reactiveness and flexibility? So we know that content is constantly changing, and the needs of content change too. And so brands then need to have a built-in framework, which are relatively easy to put forward, where you can easily adjust and react to trends that are growing. And so this slide was actually from another presentation we did. The rise of social commerce is huge in the Chinese market. It has slowed slightly in recent years, but in terms of the growth of Douyin, it's clear that content is able to drive sales. If we look at Douyin versus traditional e-commerce platforms, the success of Douyin has been its ability to capture attention through content, lead that through to a story on live streaming, and then essentially end with a purchase. So it creates a funnel that Tmall isn't able to do. And then if we look at, okay, so what form of content is the best? Short video is really one of the most popular, not just on Douyin, but we're also seeing this on Little Red Book, WeChat. We're seeing WeChat channels as of this year is starting to take increasing amounts of share. And we've also found that on the likes of, say, Tmall, that generally video content for a product page, landing page does better than static imagery. And that's not going to change. Little Red Book as well, in terms of the CTR, the click-through rate on Douyin, on video versus photo, always wins. So trying to create video content, short video content, is so important. That being said, one of the issues with short video content is it can be quite expensive. And so I'll talk about the efficiencies of how to build this in later. But again, 873 million short video viewers in China, 110 minutes an average time spent on short videos per day. So it is definitely one of the most important types of content. So how to create great content. So first, there's the process that you need to go through. One is the brand audit. So understanding earned media and how current consumers relate to your brand. So this is really, I guess, for a newer brand, a point of trying to understand how do consumers currently relate to my brand, and to ensure that you're not going in the wrong direction, right? You're able to take them key learnings and position yourself better. For brands being here for a while, it's a chance to look at, am I being reactive enough? Do I have enough video, photo content versus long text? And am I able to relate to consumers the way I want to? And another thing as well from that brand audit is looking at how much percentage of my content is supporting the likes of online sales. Two, research competitors. So don't be like them, but learn from them. That's one thing we always say. There's a lot of charts that are put up where it's kind of, you know, this is where our competitors are focusing in terms of platform and content types and USPs. Being able to stand out and have a different attitude, a different stance from a content perspective is very important. And that needs to be seen across all EC and media channels. Three, understand target audience interests plus brand USPs as well. So trying to find that sweet spot between what are the interests of my audience. As I mentioned before, that emotional connection of kind of, you know, that aspirational lifestyle is so important. If it's food and beverage, FMCG, any consumer goods, trying to connect that is kind of one of the most important pieces. But then also ensuring that you can relate that back to the brand USPs of why would a consumer buy my product? For utilizing back-end systems. So I think this is one of the areas that brands utilize the least and probably need to use it the most. Little Red Book and Douyin have some of the best data that I've ever seen, much better than Tmall, in my opinion, from what you can learn around what content works. So being able to look at keyword data from Little Red Book, being able to understand what types of videos are your target audience watching on Douyin, trying to understand what things are they clicking on, what things are they interested in, pulling interests and kind of interest maps from Little Red Book backend. These are all things that will help tailor the content across all of your different platforms. Unfortunately, on WeChat, the amount of data that's provided is quite limited, but them two platforms alone are worth setting up and trial and testing just to get that understanding. 5, understanding false claims in advertising. You will get reported. False claims in advertising, we've seen a significant rise in the last 2 years. And that's something where competitors are being a little bit more nasty and calling out other brands that are doing well in the market. 2, issues with fonts is something that's come up a lot. Trying to understand, you know, better be prepared and ensure that you own your fonts, that you own all the imagery you use, it's open source. Ensuring that your claims, you have certification to back up any claims is really crucial right now. You will get reported on something. Competitors do their homework, they understand what you don't have certification for, and they will report this. So that's something we say to all of our clients, please reinforce, double check every year, do you still have the certification? 6, know your dates. So understanding and utilizing the emotional calendar in China is very important. But again, but only for relevant dates. Another thing as well when creating content, a lot of brands will try to hit every single calendar date. Chinese New Year is a big one, and it's important that brands really take into consideration how they can localize and support this particular date. But then a lot of the other ones might not be relevant to your brand, and so you don't necessarily need to focus on them. So, for example, Women's Day would be something that's very important when it comes to cosmetics. If we look at, for example, mother and baby, obviously, or toys and accessories, Children's Day is a big one. So it's important to understand your category, what are going to be your key emotional days, but don't make a Dragon Boat Festival poster or a collaboration if you don't feel like it relates to your brand. 7, establishing an emotional connection. So building emotional connections with consumers through a comprehensive content strategy. This is very, very important. What we've seen with brands that are working as of the last 3 to 4 years, they all have a very strong emotional stance. You can't just say these are the benefits of my product, and if you do that, it won't stay relevant for very long. Number 8, production. It really is the future of content. As an agency, and a lot of the brands that we've been working with, brands that we don't work with but run their own content, everyone is investing very heavily in production. And it really is about how efficiently can you create great video and photo production. And because of the importance of Little Red Book and Douyin, we're actually seeing that this is becoming the forefront of how brands are driving more attention and building sales when they're looking at things such as social commerce. We know that a lot of the sales growth in the last year and a half has come across the social commerce. So if you don't have good production capability and don't have them asset banks, don't have that ability to react, it is very difficult. Number 9, building IP. One thing a lot of brands will focus on is, this is my brand name, this is kind of how I look, and they leave it at that. And so a lot of consumers, what you'll find is they won't know the brand name per se in China, but they will recognize certain things. It might be the mascot, it might be the brand, the logo. Certain things really stand out. So the more you can build IP and seed that among KOCs, KOLs, at offline events, it's so important to create brand capital and also this kind of memorability when it comes to consumers. 10, A/B testing. Brands should be doing A/B testing every single month, if not every week. If I had it my way, I think it's very important to understand on media. This is not on e-commerce. E-commerce is very common to do A/B testing. But in media, what are people clicking on and what are people liking? If we look at, for example, 10 different KOLs, and they're all the same size, which one had the highest click-through rate, right? What type of lifestyle content resonated the most? What type of scenarios resonated the most? What different type of target audiences reacted differently? It's something in terms of, there's a lot of market research, but there's not enough marketing testing. Refine and ensure consistency, so retain a consistent personality, again, across everything you do is important. I do have one small caveat to that, and that is that a brand had asked me a couple of weeks ago, we focus on these 2 demographics. We want to focus on this one too, but we're worried that it's a very different younger demographic. If we start talking to this one, will we lose our previous customers? The simple answer to that is choose certain platforms to talk to certain people. So if we look at Little Red Book, we know that this is generally kind of females, 25, 35-year-old mothers. This is kind of the area. So you can really focus and push on the current customer base you have here. If you then want to look at Gen Z, younger demographics, then Douyin and Kuaishou allow you to have a slightly different personality and to then build a trust within that demographic as well, so that you're talking to a larger audience. With regards to 11, it's refine and ensure consistency. Again, making sure that everything you're doing is refined and then it's the same across the different platforms you've got. And localization. So localization isn't something you do in the beginning. It's something you realize this works really well in China. We need to do more of that, right? These things don't work well. So the brand audit is all understanding what earned media. So what are people saying about you? Trying to understand what makes the brand different, and asking these key questions is so important for any brand that's starting out in China or has been here 2 to 3 years and they're struggling to really get into that higher level. Researching competitors, but don't be like them. Learn from them is very important as well. You need to stand out. Before it was understanding in the dairy category that, for example, skim milk, UHT, from Australia, grass-fed. There was like different things where it was really important. And if I had all of these, then I would be able to have a sizable market share. That is just simply not the case. Now, brands need to really understand and build out content that has a point of difference and allows them to emotionally stand out in comparison to their competitors, right? So if we look at different target audiences, trying to see how you speak to them. The one thing that's important here, though, with this slide is how does the brand slogan tie to everything? If you have a brand slogan and then you have three very different messages, it can become very confusing. So even if you're talking to a very different demographic, you need to ensure it ties together. And it's not as hard as it seems, right? And then what becomes really important is how you have different platform strategies. So now we've seen in China how different platform strategies go to different sales channels, right? Douyin for Douyin, Little Red Book essentially for Tmall, WeChat for WeChat, or just for general updates, or for communities. Communities is a big part of what is now becoming the forefront of WeChat. So with these different platforms, though, it's all been about where do they lead to. Now it's also about who are they talking to. And you can tailor things slightly different so that you've got a larger array of people that you're talking to. So the next one is establishing an emotional connection. You need to create an emotional impact. So content really needs to relate to consumers in a way that it is either aspirational, that allows them to shift away from making different purchases for them to feel special or to feel that they're different in some way. It's all about this desire for self-expression. And it's been interesting, having brands up here in China, well, in Shanghai in particular, in the last 2 months. A lot of people have been saying to me the amount of art and self-expression around Shanghai is phenomenal compared to what it used to have. And we're seeing it. It really is driven by this younger demographic where art and self-expression is a really important of what I buy and if I will pay that premium. And utilizing the backend systems I mentioned, these are some of the examples of what you can pull out. So if you look at Saturn Bird, you can understand, what they're talking about, different, areas that they're, focusing on their content. You can look at different competitors and you can dive into exactly what they're doing, all the keywords they're utilizing, what's the most important for them, point of interest in terms of trendy roads. Pulling out Anfu Road is something that for them was this kind of creating this connection between culture and coffee shops. So creating these associations is really important. For Saturn Bird, they want to make sure that they're kind of cool and hip and they have a point of difference. Other things you'll notice in there as well is like keywords around sustainability. They've done a lot in terms of sustainability programs as well. So that's a big question often we'll get asked is sustainability important in China? It's not necessarily important in some of the ways it's seen in the West, where it's all about, helping the environment, and sustainability is about very much an environmental thing. In China, it's also about community, right? And so being part of something that's sustainable is about bringing people together for the greater good. And there are lots of different ways that this can be presented. Again, understanding false claims in advertising, you can never say things like the highest or the best unless you have ways around this. There are brands that are able to use number one or biggest, but they have to have some certification that can support this. If not, you have penalties. You can even lose rights to your stores online. And then also the same thing with fonts and videos, ensuring that you have they're open source or that you have full rights to them. Knowing your dates. So the emotional calendar, again, don't always choose all of them. Choose the ones, e-commerce holidays that make most sense for you. And then as part of that, you'll build content leading into them, right? So a lot of new brands now will do 618. They won't do 11, 12. They might look at, for example, 315. There's different festivals that they'll focus on, right? And then, so in terms of then the Chinese emotional festivals, you need to choose ones that make sense. And production. So I think this is probably the most important takeaway, is really how can you build sustainable, efficient production, because that's all we're seeing is brands that are now usually utilizing WeChat video channel. If they have a post on a WeChat official account, they're even using less text. If they're putting things on Little Red Book, it's a reposted video of a KOL, KOC. A lot of the brands we're working with now, we've gone away from just planning out our content, but planning out the KOL and KOC content, because it's often cheaper to have KOLs and KOCs produce your content and then repost, right? So there's lots of different things that can be done. And this is something that the brands really need to take into consideration. I think as an extension of that is, once you understand that key message, once you understand how you're going to talk to different people, how am I going to build this out on video production, photo production, and then IP, right? Mascots, different types of memorable visualizations of the brand. We're seeing that this is so important, and then taking it to the next level and developing this into gift boxes and soft toys and, you know, different types of things that can be given in offline events. And then really trying to understand, am I doing the right thing? So at the end of every month, taking the things that you've done, looking at, well, did that work? Why did that work? Conducting A/B testing where you have a controlled environment and utilizing Little Red Book SEM, doing promotional tool on a daily small basis. You can invest 200 RMB a day, and trying to look at how different types of content react with different types of target audience. It essentially allows you to build out your full strategy for the market. Testing slogans, headlines, different things that you can tweak and change. A/B testing is really important on media, and it's often overlooked as something that's only for e-commerce. So refine and ensure consistency. So retaining a consistent personality is important. So as much as you want to change things, you need to ensure that the brand identity is still recognizable, right? So we'll see, brands that have a very strong character, a very strong way of looking, that are doing very interesting new different things. I'll give an example of A2 Milk. A2 Milk have always had a very particular look. I think it was 3 years ago, one of their main ambassadors was a rapper, right? So for an IMF brand, very strange decision to make. A2 still looked the same. The brand was very recognizable whenever you went to a store and you saw POSM or you saw something on media, but they tried something different to see how they could talk to Gen Z and how they could create this emotional connection. So that's something as well, I think, from a brand perspective, you can change elements that don't change everything, essentially, right? Localization, so it's a never-ending science. So trying to make sure that the content resonates with consumers. Again, it's ongoing, it will always change. And so it's a lot of work, right? So how do we make this efficient? And so one of the things is, if we look at the likes of, Little Red Book, Douyin and WeChat and Tmall, a lot of brands will often say to us, look, we want to put off the Douyin because it's quite expensive, and video production isn't cheap, and we want to focus on WeChat, even if WeChat's not the right channel, right? Which I find really difficult, because then I think it's almost like we're doing the wrong thing because it's cheaper and we're not talking to the right person. So what I would suggest is to do Douyin if it's the right thing to do. And utilize that content across other platforms, because we know that video content always does the best anyway. So you can take video content and reutilize it on the Red Book. It will generally do better. You might need to edit it slightly. You might need to make it smaller. You might not use all of your Douyin videos on the Red Book. You might focus on your lifestyle, more premium, high quality videos. Obviously, Douyin has different variations of content. If we look at Douyin, generally we'll split content between, say, 20% high-level content, which is, really good kind of production quality, 20% or 30% repurposed by KOLs and KOCs, which costs nothing but the cost of working with a KOC. And then you might have a lot of what we would call Douyin quality, which is kind of shorter, funny videos that are more engaging, but it allows for Douyin to be affordable. And then what it does is you can take this content and use it on WeChat video channel. You can take the higher end content and use it on Little Red Book. And you can also take some of the high end content on Douyin and repurpose it for Tmall. So trying to understand the connection between different types of video content, I think, is also really, really important. And so then if we look at how this works across different platforms, Obviously, we have Douyin, which is kind of focused around more high quality videos, often have humor, emotional responses. Little Red Book will have less commercial looking images, videos are preferred. Videos are preferred. But again, it's much more about high quality premium lifestyle. Then we have WeChat, which is highly visual posts. So they're all different, but we can still use them in similar ways, depending on what we're trying to do. So WeChat, obviously, is much more about brand education and new customer conversion, building communities and groups. One thing, for example, with brands now, we found that building communities on WeChat is so important for goods that would be relatively expensive, right? So if you look at a lot of FMCG products, you can still build mass awareness and then sales. If you look at something that's over $200, $200 US per transaction or per product, it's got to, there's a decision to be made there. And so if we look into fashion, if we look into accessories, if we look into athleisure, communities have become very important for word of mouth marketing. And so again, trying to understand, okay, so within these communities, what am I going to share? And one of the best things is videos. It's offline events. It's different things you're doing in videos that can be put onto that platform. Things from Douyin, things on Little Red Book. What we'll do with a lot of brands is we'll have events, film the event, and then we can share it across all these different channels. Little Red Book, again, it's more authentic. So what you might build out is a lot more video and imagery that is from KOLs and KOCs, but then can also be shared on the other platforms. And then Douyin has a variety, as I mentioned, of 3 different types you need to take into consideration. So if we look at WeChat, it's shifted away from kind of this long content, right, that everyone knows what it's famous for. We've now moved into this period where much less wording, much more beautiful design, straight to the point, much shorter. WeChat posts used to be very, very, very long. And we understand now that things like gamification, campaigns, video channels, and O2O are really what drive this platform, right? So if we look at the focus of WeChat, it's about having offline retail stores, offline events, and bringing people up into your community. It's not that people don't want to just read about the brand every week. It's not of importance to them. WeChat content has significantly dropped in terms of readership. So 1 post a month on WeChat, 2 posts a month on WeChat are sufficient, depending on what you're trying to do and who you're trying to talk to. There are some consumer groups that can't be found on Little Red Book and Douyin that WeChat can talk to. So again, trying to understand when you're creating content, what is the purpose is really important. Another thing that I hadn't mentioned earlier is around this geo-targeted content as well. So what a lot of brands are doing is they're creating CRM systems. WeChat has the best CRM capabilities. If not, some of the other platforms don't even have a CRM capability that you can build. So with WeChat, you can tag different people and you can talk to them in different ways. For brands that already have 5,000 to 7,000 followers, this is a really good way of engaging with them and bringing them through to different groups, depending on what they're interested in terms of your product range, the brand you have. Some might want to come to events offline. Others might want to act as an agent or distributor. So again, WeChat content's more about campaigns, event-focused information, and creating communities and groups. So with Little Red Book, the content is very different. It's a keyword-based platform. So the first part of doing anything on Little Red Book is understanding what keywords do I work under? What should I be focusing on? Because you need to integrate all of the keywords within your content over a long period of time. It is a search-based platform. You won't see results immediately. But again, the type of content needs to be more female-orientated. It needs to be it's much tier 1, tier 2. It needs to be very much focused on high-end lifestyle content. That's really the best way that you can create content in Little Red Book. And it needs to be authentic, aspirational. And it's all about how can you create good content that is a hit post. So one thing, when we analyzed Little Red Book posts, and I think I talked about this in the previous webinar, for any posts under 500 engagement, we found that they didn't have any sales for Tmall because it's a very horizontal platform. You need to really look at the keywords and make sure you're on the first swipe or the brand doesn't exist. So trying to find hit posts, so having really good content that you push out, not as frequent, maybe just once, twice, 3 times a week, But really good content and using a good keyword strategy is really important to this platform and to growing out the capabilities. And then Douyin is very different. So if we look at the way content needs to be created on Douyin, you need to have a mixture. And so this is a very important element of Douyin. The reason why is the algorithm. The algorithm actually can be rather random. And so sometimes you'll invest a lot of money in a great piece of content. And one of your other pieces of content that would be just a funny kind of snappy video will get far more reach. And it's to do with the fact that that topic was trending at that time. And so although better content does do better, and you need to have some good content on Douyin, because when it does do better, it does significantly better. You also need to play the, not all of the eggs in one basket. So it's suggested that you might have 2 posts high quality, 3 posts lower quality, 2 posts repurposed, right? 2 posts KOL reshared. And so you're then building out content that it's affordable because you're not doing 20 high quality posts. And you're building on the algorithm because some of the KOC and even brand stuff that's been repurposed can often be trending at that time and can allow for you to increase your exposure. The other thing with Douyin is to also understand that everything you're doing, you're building into the DMP, into the data bank. And so within the data bank, you can then build all of the followers that you want to have, all of the potential customers, everyone that has interest. So you need to look at different types of target audiences. And so your content needs to have some variety as well. So variety is really key on Douyin. That's the thing we've found. And once you spot what works and what helps then lead through potential buyers, you can see the whole awareness through to sale and advocate plan on Douyin, which you can't get on other platforms. And that's really the power of this platform. E-commerce content strategy. So here, again, trying to create that link for if we look at landing pages, the importance of landing pages, product display, how video can be a game changer for what happens on Tmall, bringing through all of the elements that are important. For example, one thing that I've noticed a big difference on Tmall would be that before you'd often just have product display, a few USPs in terms of on the product page. We're now seeing that lifestyle product pages can do much better, even for FMCG, for food and beverage. And so again, trying to keep up to on time with what type of lifestyle content is working better within that given period for EC as well. And how can you then have more efficiency across social media and these platforms? And really Douyin helps that, because if you are having this high level content, it can be repurposed. And high level content, it's much better having 5 pieces of high level video content than 100 pieces of written content that no one's going to read. So measuring content success. 1, e-commerce KPIs, so increase the number of visitors to the sales channels, such as the flagship store, through searches of the brand keywords. So how do we measure content? And I talked about this in a previous, in one of our previous sessions, but I think this is really important, because when you're doing A/B testing, yes, it's important to look at click-through, but ultimately you should always be mapping what you're doing on media with what you're doing on EC, and looking at how is my media impacting my sales? And so that's the number one thing, because what you need to be very careful about with content as well in China is you create great lifestyle content, but no one buys your brand. They just like your lifestyle content. And so that I've seen that trap happen a few times. And so, yes, it's important to click through, but are people clicking and commenting because of the brand? Look at the comments, right? Is it just because it's a great shot? Is it because they have this, they can relate to what the brand, what the image, what the video is trying to say? So e-commerce KPIs are always number 1, and that shouldn't change for any brand and what they're trying to do. With WeChat, again, it's all about engagement, community. So, number of followers, trying to build that community, having them fall into different groups, having a little assistant that can talk to different followers because you can't from the official account. Looking at article reads, ongoing engagement, that's really the important thing. And obviously now video views with channel. But, would you look at, for example, there are things on there that wouldn't be as important that you would see on Little Red Book. Little Red Book, for example, it's all about engagement. The amount of views is irrelevant. If the engagement high, it shows people enjoy the post, they like the post, they reacted with the post. Look at number of brand-related posts. You can even look at brand health within Little Red Book. So these are really important elements for a Little Red Book, but it's all about where does your content sit. Whereas WeChat is how are people relating to my content on a weekly basis? Are they loyal? Are they part of my groups? Do they come to my offline events? And then Douyin is very different. It's about creating a number of brand assets that can bring in and accumulate data and really trying to have variety. I think that variety is something that is really important for cracking Douyin. If you don't have the variety factor, that it means that you're limiting yourself in what could be, and you're limiting the TA as well. You need to work with different TAs, different types of demographics, sell to them, understand what works, and then bring that back to the start of the awareness funnel. So I'm going to touch on a couple of case studies of brands that we've worked with and just kind of things that have done well. Obviously, I can't go into too detail, but I'll give some ideas of how content can be built out, right? And so the most important thing would be really around like brand collaborations. Brand collaborations in China is a huge thing. And so one thing that's really important about creating content around that is if you partner with a brand that is bigger than you, but doesn't give you any love back in terms of that collaboration, it can actually be damaging, right? Do they add back at the account? Does it fit well together? And the key thing there is when we've partnered our brands with larger brands, is they need to see a fit. If they don't see a fit between how these two products go together and kind of match and create a great story, then bigger brands won't want to have a collaboration. You can't fit, kind of two things together, square peg round hole, and try and think that they'll not want to. Okay, they might do it, but it'll charge 200,000 RMB. When we come to brand collaborations, then you need to have a great story. You need to ensure there's sharing between the two. For development of IP, this is something that is important. Again, looking at different, mascots, things you can build out. Customization and personalization of packaging is very important. Transforming packaging for other easily visible cases. Offline events and building that content out to there as well. Pop-up locations, and obviously short video being king. So one brand we worked with a lot is obviously Bundaberg. They've had great success in the market. Some of the things here, it just really shows you how, high quality production, the brand fits very well to that. It definitely has that color and vibrancy that is why Chinese consumers love the brand so much, right? But you can see how that's brought in through the merchandise, through the collaborations, through the production. All of this is just so important when you're taking an idea and then you're trying to develop that out across different brands, right? So looking at how then you can localize for certain periods as well. Yes, the brand might be colorful in like a certain way, but if you really want to succeed in China, you need to take into account 2 to 3 key localization periods and how can you work with UGC on developing them. Another case study that I think that's done a really good job around content is Ella's Kitchen. So we actually won an award for this brand late last year, and what we've been doing. And I think what's important here is not necessarily the development of what kind of how the brand was later utilized, but was understanding what is the problem, right? And so the problem was that the brand needed something that would stand out. And one thing is Ella's, compared to a lot of the other nutritional health brands, they don't lie about what they have in there. But it's hard to say that your competitors are lying and they're saying, they have more apple than they should and different things. So with Ella's, what we were able to do was we were able to understand one of the most important fundamental things for mothers was that the brand was being honest to them. So we went from kind of the global position of when mealtime becomes playtime, our love for food lasts a lifetime. It's much more about this emotional connection for the child and the importance of the child enjoying the food. We went back to the mother's perception, which was there's no secrets in Ella's Kitchen, which means that I can trust this brand. What I have on the back is exactly what I will get. And we then had to build this slogan out across all of the different channels, EC, media, and trying to create that consistency in everything that we do, the fonts that we utilize, trying to create something that's unique and different. So every time someone sees this brand in China, they go, oh, that's Ella's Kitchen. And then even as far as looking at the mascot, right? So trying to realize that what would be the best mascot when it comes to an animal for creating a connection between the UK and China, and something that's easily recognizable, something we can have on all of what we do, and creating this recognizable IP and a consistent memory point is so important. It's more important than the Chinese name. Because there's a lot of brands in market, and the brand needs to stand out. It's something, when it's seen, it is recognized. I might not know what the Chinese name is, I might know what the English name is, but when I see that product, it's important. So trying to build in that mascot side and trying to create something that's memorable. And from that, we then created merchandise, suitcases, hats, lots of different types of IP. So when people see that around the streets, when mothers and children are wearing it, they automatically go, wow, that's Ella's Kitchen, and I know this brand. So yeah, so all in all, I think the important thing around content is, one, understanding the big idea and sticking with that and trying to ensure that you have that across all of your platforms. That's very, very important. So you can create a memorable brand. But two, also ensuring that you look at that every quarter. You're constantly doing A/B testing on smaller types of messaging. You're constantly looking at different types of IP that you can create to see, did that work? Did that help in terms of boosting up sales? And I think then the final thing as a takeaway would really be, if you look at content and the creation of content in the Chinese market for the next year, at least, I would say, how can you pivot your brand towards being video production focused? Whether that's in terms of what you're doing on Tmall, whether it's what you're doing on JD, Douyin, WeChat channel. I think that's really important as well, because that's how you tell stories in China at the moment. And I think it's a very important element, rather than having lots of different content, but trying to focus on them parts. Okay, brilliant. I think now, Sandra, we can move to questions. Sure, if anyone has any questions.
I'm just going to make myself host again, so then I can pull up the Q&A slide. All right, let me share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Good. All right, so thank you for your presentation, Ryan. We have had a few questions come through, so I'm just going to go through them. The first one has to do with video content. So what are the differences in how video content should be used across the different platforms, such as LRB, Douyin, and WeChat, in terms of the types of videos and the format that the video takes? Like, should it be like the phone format, or more so the screen format with the landscape and portrait?
Oh, so definitely mobile, right? Everything's mobile. So portrait. If we look at, say, Little Red Book, much higher quality. But again, it's kind of the good videos that you would put on Douyin, you can utilize on Little Red Book. More lifestyle, out and about, kind of aspirational focused. Product needs to be displayed, whereas in Douyin, it's not necessarily as clear. It depends what you're trying to do. We've seen in like food and beverage recipes play better on Little Red Book, but then if we look over at Douyin, it's more kind of sort of entertainment, out and about humor. So there are differences, but you can find like a bit of a middle ground between the two, but definitely mobile.
All right, and we have been talking a lot about video content for content marketing, but what about text and photo content? Are these formats still necessary for Little Red Book, especially, and WeChat?
Sorry, I just lost you there, Sandra. Was that the last question?
Yeah, so with video content being on the rise, are text and photo content still relevant, especially for Little Red Book platform?
You need to have text because you need to describe what you're showing, right? So, you still need to have some text. But I think in terms of, there's some brands we've worked with that they'll pick out, particular things of how it needs to be displayed in text. Little Red Book, yes, because you need to have a good keyword strategy. I completely agree with that. But on WeChat, as long as the message is clear, it doesn't need to always be exactly on brand in the text. It needs to tell the story. If it's just a wall of text anyway, you're not going to get any reads. No one's going to go see that post. So the most important thing is to move away from that small detail that I think in China often consumers will just overlook, and to start looking at how do I capture attention and how do I get eyeballs on my brand away from others. I think that that's definitely the most important part. And if you look at Douyin, that's exactly what the success has been of that platform.
We also had a question come in about Tmall and Taobao, which have live stream videos, and how it's different from the short videos on Douyin or TikTok.
Yeah, so there's two different things. There's live streaming and then there's videos. So videos, generally, you do have videos on Tmall and Taobao. It's part of their content app, the Weitao kind of area. So yes, but it's not as big as you would have on Douyin. Douyin is a video platform. So Douyin, yeah, that the kind of the difference there, I guess, is that Douyin would have much more kind of fun videos, whereas videos on Tmall are more about products and, you know, how products work, functionality. It's not too much fun. Live streaming is different. There are 2 to 3 hour sessions where you have a KOL or a brand owner talking about the brand and all the benefits. You might have a segment of a stream that is shared. And then from that, people can purchase directly. And so now Douyin live streaming is really the main one. Taobao, Tmall live streaming is still around, but the ROI, the return on investment, is significantly less. So a lot of brands have moved all of their live streaming, or a large proportion of their investment on live streaming, over to Douyin.
We actually did have a question about live streaming and how it ties into the content marketing plan. So I think this person is asking, like, for example, would you promote your live streaming through your content on your platforms, or is it kept completely separate?
So live streaming is relatively separate because you have live streaming sessions, but you promote them sessions, if that makes sense. So you'll have a period of time, like a preheat, where you will, capture data of people that you can then later invite. You'll announce to followers on different platforms. You really want to preheat any kind of live streaming you're doing, because it's an opportunity for someone to jump into a window and essentially then buy the product. But it's separate, right, from everything else you're doing. You have your own kind of channel, I guess, for that to happen. But yeah, you would definitely preheat with content.
Okay. And another question has to do with the type of content that is shared. So how important is it for brands to tell the story behind their founding in order to establish that brand image?
Founding, I guess that means, would that be kind of the founder and where they come from and the history?
Yeah, I guess they mean like how the brand came about and like the whole personality of it.
I think a good example there would be if you take a brand like Brompton Bikes, which is from the UK. Obviously, it's done very well in China. It's a great example. They have a very long history around the bike. Now, I don't think Chinese consumers care too much about the history, right? It's what the history tells them. The history tells them that these are handmade bikes, that these bikes are expensive because they're luxury. They fill a particular lifestyle gap. So you can have the founder in the background of what it is, but only if it supports the message, and only if it helps validate why you're telling that story. And if that comes back to quality or function or lifestyle aspiration, then sure, that makes sense. But I think knowing that it's a person or a founder that, kind of did this because of their care for this reason and that reason, in China doesn't necessarily work as much as it does in other countries, right? When it comes back to kind of this individualism and kind of people really resonating with, oh, that's a great thing that person's doing. It's more about how does any history behind the brand support how consumers will say this is a handcrafted great product, right? And I think then it's important.
Okay, yeah, I think that was all the questions that came in so far.
I think there's just one. I don't know if it's coming through on my side. There was one question here.
Okay.
Is there? Yeah. Do you see that?
Yeah, one just came through. Is there still a cost-effective way for British healthy snack brands to get into the Chinese market since it's such a competitive space?
So yeah, I mean, snacks do well in China. What I always say is don't look at it as there's, all these competitive brands in the market and there's no space. I think that the major thing, we distribute brands. And when we distribute brands online, the main thing we'll look at is does that brand compete well in its price point, right? Doesn't mean that it needs to be at Lay's level. It needs to be comparative to other brands. It needs to have a point of difference. If that's the case, then lots of brands can still succeed in this market. There are opportunities. We see success stories every year. There are failure stories. Now, the failure stories would be the brand just doesn't fit the consumer, right? There's the product doesn't taste good to them, or they don't see the benefit, the functions of the health behind it. It might focus on things such as sustainability that they don't resonate with. If that has that kind of fundamental problem, then the brand won't do well in the market. But you can quickly look at categories and you can say, okay, well, there's these products and these guys are doing quite well. There's obviously a market there. Then, though, comes the question, what is the cost of that market? So, the likes of, say, Tmall and JD aren't cheap. There are, upfront costs to get involved with them. Distribution usually follows that nowadays. It used to be a case where you'd find a distributor for offline and that would support, but we're in a market now of 42% e-commerce, 42% of total retail is e-commerce, right? So even distributors themselves know that if a brand doesn't sell well online, they're going to struggle in this market. And so from that point of view, that needs to be taken into consideration, that it's not a cheap market. It can be quite expensive to start in. But if you follow the right steps, it is a good market, right? But again, go back to quality, function, do tests, do consumers like the product? I know that sounds crazy, but a lot of times we'll find that consumers just at the end of the day, they like the product, but not enough to continue to buy it. And that kind of, that price point where it sits, repeat purchase. For any product in China that has success, it has strong repeat purchase. If you can't build repeat purchase into a healthy snack brand, then it's going to be a very, very tough climb in the market. That being said, if we look at the data, healthy snacking is continuing to do well in this market. In terms of what would be a cost-effective way to build in terms of e-commerce, there's very cost-effective ways to start selling cross-border into the Chinese market, but the problem is you're never really going to build the ROI to make it a long-term sustainable option, right? There's been mini programs, there's been daigous or parallel imports, there's all sorts of different things that the brands have found in terms of ways to sell here, and some have managed to do well, but it's very, very rare. Really, the number one is still through Tmall. The number two, or sometimes number one, depending on the product, is Douyin as well. So we found Douyin can be quite cost effective. But really, if as a brand, them two starting points are not feasible, then the only other option is to find a distributor, which is quite hard, which then will make it quite a competitive space to enter. Hopefully that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think that was the last question then. So Ryan's contact details are on the screen right now, and please feel free to reach out if you have any other questions that were not answered or that come up after the webinar. Our next webinar is planned for the 5th of July from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. China time on Wednesday, and it will be on KOL and KOC marketing in China. So from influencers to sales. And with that, thank you so much, Ryan, for doing the presentation, and thank you everyone for joining. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sandra. Thanks, everyone.